This podcast is brought to you by the School of Advanced Study, University of London.
So, over there by the red thing staring into all our eyes is Phyllis Brighouse, known I'm sure to many of us here, the only performer in this series that I've met on the Isle of Man ferry, who I think many of us know of as for her work in the classical reception of, the classical reception by John Buckeyes, and she's a doctoral student at Liverpool, but she also has this other strand to her life as a performance. And over here we have Wendy and sometime RHUL student Christine, who are two of the beating hearts of the by Jove Theatre company. There may be more coming up not long later, is there? Another of the hearts is teaching until 6 o'clock. But as maybe this is a bit of a spoiler, but as that particular heart is male, I think we can probably do that now. We're otherwise going to try and follow something resembling the usual format in which each of the practitioners is going to get a slot each, which they will fill in their own distinctive, unpredictable ways, but it will involve some discussion of what they do, and then some performance of what they do, and then we'll have a general discussion with everyone at the end. That's the plan. It could break down almost immediately. The only other thing I know is that Phyllis is going to go first, and what happens from this point onwards is in your hands.
Did you all get one of the little handouts, because that will mean that you can read it later on. It's got the synopsis and the character breakdown on it, which means I can whiz through it quickly. It's set in 1929, when talkies are about to break into silent cinema and change everything. And Luigi, who is running his own theatre company, cinema company, he decided this is going to be for him, and he's previously had The War at Troy as a silent movie, and they think the audience would love to hear the words, so they want to do a version of it with words. So they've hired the author of a best-selling book on called Hector's War, set at Troy, to come and write him a script, which is produced. And he's very worried. The writer Charles Langham is very worried because he thinks that they're going to play Merry Hell with his script, and he wants to come over to America to sort it all out. And he arrives on the day of the Wall Street crash. So will it actually the film get made? Will the film studio and Luigi even survive? And I've got a note here on the origins. It updates the archetype of Cassandra, the prophetess whom nobody will believe, and uses discussions about the movie The Siege of Troy to inform the audience as to Cassandra's significance. It's based on the MA research for my dissertation, Cassandra, the Unheeded Voice, which examines the best use made of Cassandra's voice in modern narrative texts by 3 authors. And then I give you a brief breakdown of the characters. You've got Charles Langham. He's in his mid-40s. His son died during the First World War, and it's damaged him rather. Luigi Bertolucci, mid-30s, shrewd, clever, talented filmmaker. Everything you wear screams success. Flashy dresser, very pushy. You've got Sandy, aged about 30, his young British secretary, who lost 2 brothers in the war. And then you've got the radio DJ and the newspaper vendor, who pop in every now and again. And the way I'm structuring it to make it fit the time is I've taken the significant bits and we're going to read them, and then when things like the character summaries and the bits of dialogue that come out to bring out character, I'm going to read summaries for you. So we're going to start with Charles, the writer, otherwise known as Chaz, enters carrying a briefcase. He packs away a few books that are in a bookcase that's on the stage, into a trunk, and where he is actually the office that they're going to give him to work in. He reads the book cover blurb of his book Hector's War. So if you'd like to begin.
The Hector knew 60 ways for heroes to die in battle. None of them easy. They die in agony and blood, a lot of blood. They drop to their knees, screaming, arms missing, legs missing. The only time they don't scream is when their heads are missing. Not much of Peter came home from Gallipoli. Missing, believed, killed to action.
He takes Peter's photo from his wallet and talks to it.
Trojan War wouldn't be any picnic, would it, boy? Mud, cold, hunger. Dysentery too, like as not, the dreaded plague of any siege army, dug into its little corner of a foreign field, all around them, ruin. And opposite another army just like them and not like them. And any minute the enemy could come marching over the gap in the middle, spitting death. Surprising anyone survived.
He puts it away and packs away some more books.
That's the lot, ready to ship back home, a home fit for heroes. 10 years of toil, tears and sweat to build it, and it all fell apart in a week.
He puts the book into the travel trunk, closes the lid and exits with his briefcase. Time shift back to Black Thursday, October the 24th, 1929, the day the Wall Street crash began. A 1929 radio announcer cuts the Charleston music he's playing and reads the news.
The Charleston, still popular today in 1929. This is WLM on Thursday, October 24th, and here is the news. Leading bankers met this morning after the unexpected and unprecedented sudden drop in automobile share prices in the last hour of trading yesterday. Afterwards, they released a joint statement. In the last 5 years, the market has only gone up, and we are confident it will do so again. Shares in automobile manufacturing continue to be sound investments.
When Charles enters carrying his briefcase, he looks around and he is not impressed.
This is Hollywood.
And then just a summary. Luigi enters and we see how obsessed he is with the stock market and how dependent he is on it. He promises to redecorate the dingy office by investing the fee quoted by the decorators and then selling the shares for a profit after the work's done. The decorating will pay for itself. Then they start to discuss the script.
I've got the first draft done. Basically, I just dramatised the book. You read it?
Sure, there's this city, a regular fort, and it's surrounded by an invading army riding around on the beach.
Make it sound like cowboys and Indians with chariots. Do you know the story?
Sure I do. There was this most beautiful woman in the world, Helene.
Helen,
Like I said, Helene.
married to the king of Sparta.
And she runs off with this other guy.
Paris.
Sure, I know the story.
Maybe we should talk about the script. Make sure you like what I've done.
Book an appointment when Sandy gets back from running some errands. Sandy, my secretary.
Why am I getting a bad feeling about this?
And Sandy arrives. She's an English girl. We learn she's the person who liaises between Luigi's broker and his bank and who carries out his instructions. We also learn that she's phoned Paul Warburg, her old boss, on New York's Wall Street to ask for a job. Luigi's promised his niece Angelica that she can be his secretary, and Warburg has answered no. He believes that jobs will soon be very scarce. The stock market boom is a bubble and it's about to burst. He advises Luigi to sell up, but Luigi's sceptical. Sandy points out that Warburg remembers the earlier German economy crash. He recognises the signs. Chaz introduces himself, Luigi leaves, and Chaz and Sandy start to put the books from the trunk into the bookcase.
You're really looking for another job? You make Luigi bankrupt or something?
Sandy drops some books. A photo falls to the floor and Sandy picks it up. Chaz snatches it away from her and shoves it into a drawer.
Sorry, this whole thing's giving me the jitters.
Not your fault. Which worries you most? Being out of a job or the forthcoming stock market crash?
Both. I mean, if Mr. Warburg's right, then my friends, the other secretaries, Pat and Jean, who share my apartment, my neighbours, they'll be ruined.
Oh, let's wait and see. This movie, do you think it'll be a success?
Actually, yes. We did a silent movie about Troy not so long ago. It was a terrific hit. So when he saw me reading your book, Mr. Bertolucci thought it would make the perfect talkie. The people will remember the story and want to hear the words.
Ah, my book. He's read it, has he?
Of course. Well, I gave him a summary. Honestly, if he says he can make it a hit talkie about the Trojan War, then take it from me. It can be done.
We learn that Sandy came to America to meet young men. So many young men of her generation died in the war. It was a risk, but a calculated one. Life's too short not to take calculated risks. They chat about Charles's successful writing career. And Chaz admits his first 3 novels were written in a single year, but he doesn't say why. Sandy surprises him by admitting she wants to be a film star but can't audition. She organises the auditions. Chaz suggests that Luigi listens to her act out a speech from his script. That will show Luigi what she can do. But Chaz has an ulterior motive. Sandy exits to find Luigi and Chaz riffles through his manuscript.
Right, this is too good an opportunity to miss. No, not that. Ah, Cassandra. Perfect. Let's see what Luigi makes of her. That should tell me a lot about the sort of message I plan to make in my book.
Sandy returns with Luigi.
Sandy says you want to see me.
Hang on. I'd like to run a bit of the script past you. Could you do me a favour and read this while we listen, to give Mr. Bertolucci an idea of what I'm trying to do?
And he hands him the script.
You're playing Cassandra. Her brother Hector's been killed by the Greek hero Achilles. She's just seen his body carried home, and she's going to predict Troy's fate and her own. Off you go.
And Sandy launches into the following speech. She gives a really bad silent movie reading, very overacted, pretty awful and very comic. And Chaz's reactions are too, head in hands at one point, while Luigi remains poker-faced.
The god came to me. Apollo, we are doomed, doomed to death, doomed to slavery, doomed to oblivion. My sisters and brothers, my mother and father, and the Greeks too. They have desecrated our altars and shed our blood, so much sacrilege. The gods will turn on them and they shall die at sea. All except Odysseus, whose diseased mind conceived the Trojan Horse. He shall wander the earth for 10 long years. As for myself, I shall entice the Greek king Agamemnon, and his wife shall cut us down. So he shall end. How was that?
Unbelievable. Chuck, we need to talk. 5 minutes.
Off he goes. Sandy admits that she'd be useless in the talk if she wasn't born to be a star.
What about you? Do you think Mr. B liked your script? Or at least the bit I read?
Put it this way, I know the story I want this movie to tell. Unfortunately, it's not the version Luigi wants.
But your story's pretty accurate, I think.
How on earth did you know that?
I grew up with 2 brothers, both of them mad for the Iliad. All those tales of valour and honour. They used to talk about it for hours.
Used to? You lost a brother in the war?
Both of them. Passchendaele. You?
My son, Peter. Gallipoli. He'd been so excited the chance to see the location of Troy for himself. That's what they called it, you know, the second Troy.
I volunteered as a nurse when it was nearly all over. Now I feel...
Guilty? We all share that, every one of us. Serving, not serving, just surviving. You know, the thing about the Trojan War is the violence was so indiscriminate. Death was always just around the corner. In the end, the enemy to overcome was yourself. Yourself and your fear.
That's why you wrote Hector's War?
Oh, Hector wasn't me, he was all of us, but it sold well. And here I am with a film contract and a movie producer who hates my script.
Luigi enters and he heard that last remark.
Your script, Chuck. It's full of people who clutter up a good story.
Just then, they hear a newspaper boy selling newspapers, extra edition, which labels that day as Black Thursday. A nervous Sandy leaves to buy a paper, and Luigi admits he already knew that the camera would never like Sandy. That's why he hired her. Then they start to argue about the script.
Okay, your script. You had me listen to that page for a reason.
You didn't like it.
Frankly, it stinks. It's full of gods and second-string characters cluttering up the story, like that Cassandra girl.
Cassandra's the film's prophetess, a bridge between the past and the future for everyone else.
You make her sound like the British size in Venice.
She's the voice of truth you have to listen to. If she says something will happen, it has to be true. She's one of the most important people in the story.
No. Helen is the only important woman in the movie. The love interest with Paris, pitted against Agamemnon, the leader of the Greeks.
Then,
the Greeks lead the Trojan horse on the beach. The Trojans take the horse inside the city, and the Greeks hidden inside climb out and open the gates.
and then mayhem, more than you could possibly imagine. The river just outside the gate would become a quagmire. Boys weighed down with weapons, slipping, sliding into thick, sticky mud, drowning in mud, calling for their mothers, while battle-hardened men could do nothing except follow orders and march past unable to weep, no tears left after that. God help the Trojans.
Well, you don't have to show all that. This ain't no horror flick. Concentrate on the Trojans who live to fight another day.
Another day?
Think I don't know my own culture? Aeneas, you must have heard of him.
The Roman version of the story.
Never mind Cassandra. Larcon the priest, that's the character to concentrate on. The great wooden horse, an offering to the seagull to take the Greeks safely home. Larcon warns the Trojans not to take the horse, you remember? In the Aeneid. You've read versions of it.
It's in the Iliad too, yeah. It's not a major part of the story.
Of course it is. Larcon and his sons, they are killed by two great sea serpents. Very dramatic. The Trojans, they take it as an omen. They fear insulting the sea god and ignore Larcon's warning. That's why they take the horse into the city. Ah, Larcon. Ever seen the statue in the Vatican?
Oh, one day maybe.
I saw it before I left Italy. My mama taught me. Don't ever forget your roots, she said.
So Aeneas.
Breaks out of Troy with the surviving army, sails to Italy and finds Rome. What a sequel that will make.
It's not quite the novel I wrote.
Chuck, there's something you need to know about the audience for this movie. There is a lot more Italians in America than there are Greeks.
Just then, Sandy rushes in with the paper and the news that the film crews are panicking. The market's been dropping like a stone all morning. Everyone is selling and no one is buying. Sandy is desperately worried about the fate of all her friends. People might not be able to eat at the weekend. Luigi, though, can't believe it.
You're describing total meltdown. Maybe the markets will drop for a bit, then pick up.
I feel sick. I wish I knew what to do, what to say. Never mind.
Sandy, this is not like you. Sit down. Wait till after the weekend. It will be fun.
This isn't good. How's this movie to be financed?
Shareholders' money. My shareholders. Never mind the crew. They'll be panicking. We have to look in control.
Solvent? You have to look solvent.
Friday night wage packets. They're in the safe.
Hand them out now. Early. When they've been paid, they'll come down.
Yes, Mr. Bertolucci.
She rushes out.
This really isn't good. They've labelled today Black Thursday. Late yesterday afternoon saw...
And that's the newspaper. The announcer.
Late yesterday afternoon saw the start of a spectacular drop in the value of stocks. Today the downward spiral continues, 10, 20, 30 points at a time. In the New York Exchange, there are gasps from the visitors' gallery as traders try and offload their stocks at a third of their former price.
A popular reaction seems to be that this can't be happening. Mounting panic, ticker tape machines can't keep up.
Here, give me that. There, I told you it would be okay. Charles E. Mitchell, chairman of the National City Bank, attended a meeting with Rockefeller. Afterwards they announced, keep cool, no cause for alarm, some distressed selling, but none of the banks or brokers are in difficulty. Everything's okay, Chuck. They've put 250 million of their own money into stocks. Now they wouldn't do that if there was anything to worry about, would they?
Perhaps.
Let's just see what tomorrow brings. Meantime, I have a business to run and we have a script meeting.
Time shift forward to Tuesday the 29th. The announcer reads a news bulletin.
It's Tuesday, October 29th, and the financial crisis that started last Thursday continues. All over America, there are brokers who borrowed from the banks so that they could lend money to their clients. Those clients to use the money to buy shares from their brokers. Now the banks are calling in their loans. But all these investments have dropped in value. The only way the brokers can pay back their banks is to sell their clients' shares for whatever they can get. Everyone is selling and no one is buying. As a result, the market is plunging.
A newsboy runs around with an extra edition.
Extra, extra, market crash latest, stars of stage and screen bankrupt, Groucho Marx loses fortune, read all about it, extra, extra.
Luigi is now beginning to accept this is for real. He's a broken man. He and Chaz read the latest news in the papers. The wave of selling continues. No one can pay all their bills. All their life savings invested in the market have vanished. And they've no money to spend. Sales have slumped. Employers can't pay their employees. And suddenly, everyone's afraid for their jobs. Luigi asks Chaz, and Chaz reassures him. Chaz says at the bottom,
Oh, sorry. How about you?
I waited for a call from my broker. He didn't call, so I called him. Every day. But so did everybody else. His line's permanently busy, so I went to his office. The queues stretched down the hall and into the street. Women, some of them holding little babies, were weeping. So were the men. I couldn't get near. If they are both, so am I. My world has ended.
Troy has fallen.
And he reads.
A dam has burst and the tide seems unstoppable. Good God. In the last 5 days, $25 billion has just evaporated into the air.
And some of it was my money, family money. To say nothing of... What do I tell my shareholders?
The truth, that Sandy's old boss was right. The bottom's fallen out of the market. What do we tell your employees?
As of now, they're no longer my employees. Not if I can't pay their wages.
And this movie, can it get made if you don't have any investors?
No.
Charles has to start to repack the books into his trunk. A distressed Sandy enters with the news that Jimmy Danvers, their star actor, has killed himself by jumping off the roof of his building after losing his entire fortune on the market. Half of Luigi's staff are in the same boat. Everyone's panicking. Sandy, though, is going to surprise them all.
Mr. Bertolucci, I've been trying to pin you down for days, but you've been rushing from one meeting to the next. This is important. You have to pay the wages early, like last week.
Pay them?
What? You didn't believe Mr. Warburg when he said the market was going belly up, but I did. There's the cash in the safe to pay everyone a month's wages.
What? I have money.
No, they have money. All you have to do is pay them and assure them they've all got a job.
No. I'll have to let them up. Today. I'll pay them up to today.
You don't have to do that because...
Yes, I do. But they'll get their wages up to today. I'm a fair man.
Mr. Bertolucci, will you listen? You've got plenty of money. I knew I'd done the right thing. Well, eventually. I had a few nasty moments last week. In the end, I didn't have the nerve to tell you until things were so bad you'd be pleased. Only then I couldn't pin you down.
What have you done?
Well, you know that last Monday I had lunch with Mr. Warburg? And he told me to sell up.
If you're offering him a loan, I don't think it'll be enough.
He doesn't need one. Because on Tuesday afternoon, that last hour, when the market started to drop...
You sold your shares.
No, I sold mine on the Monday. I sold yours.
What?
That's why your broker never called. You don't have one anymore.
God, talk about calculated risk.
The company has $20 million safely in the bank.
20 million? In ready cash? In the bank? And the bank let you?
Why not? I hadn't embezzled it. We transferred the money into the company bank account, not mine. They just assumed you needed a large sum for the new soundstage.
And the family?
I'm sorry, I didn't have access to their money.
What have you been wrong?
I hadn't run off with it, you know. You just have reinvested it.
For less profit. The market was falling. You don't sell when it's falling. You buy.
Luigi's immediate reaction is concerned not just for his shareholders but his family. Using the excuse that Sandy's gone behind his back, he sacks her and says Angelica can now have her job and salary immediately. Charles demands that she receives a month's wages in advance, then filming must start immediately using the script they already have, his script. Luigi agrees and rushes off to reassure everyone.
Oh, God, what a delightful fellow.
But he's right. I could have made an awful mess of his finances. I knew it at the time.
So why? Why do it?
Why do you write about Troy?
I understand it. So did Peter. He read classics, Oxford, if the war.
So you understand? Well, I worked for Mr. Warburg. He'd said disaster in the face in the past, and he understood too. We're used to disaster, aren't we? My brothers. This is your son, isn't it? Peter.
I keep it with me. But just looking at it brings it all back.
He puts it in his wallet. He continues to pack the books away.
I took this job because I was ready to move on. Talk about the books and what's in them with other people. Maybe it's time to move on in other ways. Stop hiding behind Hector and face the world again.
And Chaz admires Sandy's courage in following her instincts and he makes her an offer. He needs a secretary and he thinks that she's brave, kind and has the kind of courage of her convictions. Sandy agrees. Even after Chaz says that Bohemian Chelsea is even madder than Hollywood, she's going to go and work for him.
I have money in the bank and I can still earn.
A last bit of advice then. from Mr. Warburg. Your money. Spread it around a bit.
Because the banks are next. God, if you can't trust a bank.
Have you heard what people are calling it? The Cassandra of Wall Street. Well, I'll tell you something else Mr. Warburg says. Human folly and greed will always be much stronger forces than reason and restraint. And history always repeats itself.
But surely this couldn't ever happen again. Another speculative bubble with the bankers making a mess of the world. Never, you have to be wrong.
Oh dear. I'd better not tell you my full name then. Did I ever tell you that my mother was a Jane Austen fan? My sister's called Jane. Did I mention her? And I was named after Jane Austen's sister.
So Sandy is short for?
Cassandra. I'll be right next door, clearing my desk.
I'll just pack these away and I'll be right along.
Sandy exits. Chaz finishes packing the books and picks up a copy of the latest book.
Homer knew 60 ways for heroes to die in battle, none of them easy. They died in agony and blood. After blood, they dropped to their knees screaming, arms missing, legs missing. The only time they don't scream is when their heads are missing. Not much of Peter came home after the song. Missing, believed, killed in action.
He takes the photo from the wallet.
Trojan War wouldn't be any picnic, would it, boy? Mud, cold, hunger. Dysentery too, like as not, the dreaded plague of any siege army, dug into its little corner of a foreign field. All around them, ruin. And opposite, another army just like them and not like them. At any minute, the enemy could come marching over the gap in the middle, spitting death. Surprising anyone survived.
Puts the photo away and packs away a few more books.
But I did. That's the lot, ready to ship back home. Home fit for heroes, 10 years of fighting to build it, and it all fell apart in a week. Time to start rebuilding, I think.
He exits with the briefcase. What I should have said at the beginning is Paul Goldberg, the Cassandra of Wall Street, was real. Sandy, his secretary, wasn't, and she's using his voice. But he was for real.
Do you want to say anything more about the play and its genesis at this stage, or should we leave that for the discussion?
What would people like? Would they like to go on? Would they like to talk about it now, or they want to think it over, or they want to do it while it's fresh in their minds?
We just had it online. Yeah.
Anyone got anything? There's, one of the things I can say was that it didn't come to me just all like that. It kind of evolves. You know, it's like when you're writing, it's very much, you've got this idea, you've got that idea, and you sort of start putting them together, and if that fits, and you knit it in, and that doesn't fit, you take it out. And then you think, well, where can I go with this? And Bertolucci was Italian because the original actor who I got to do the part said, I can't do American. But I can do Italian, but I have an Italian grandfather. So I made him Italian, and then the whole Aeneid thing came from that. And sort of start looking at the logical consequences of it. So it's kind of like Topsy, it grows. But I did get the initial inspiration from a program that I'd wanted to write for a long time about Cassandra and a reception of Cassandra. And it was when I saw a documentary about Paul Warburg on the TV. And I thought, that's it. That's where I can set it. That's what I can do for the present day to make Cassandra. And I had her sell the shares because Cassandra, you have to believe her, therefore she has to have the courage of her convictions. So she's got to do what she says is right. So she couldn't not sell those shares.
Was this your... there are things I want to come back to, I think, in the joint discussion, but just specifically on this particular place. Was this your first contemporary play? Because you've been doing...
No, it's not the first contemporary, no. It's one of my first big plays, contemporary play that's been classic, because I've done 2 adaptations of Oedipus and Agamemnon. And my aim with those was to make them comprehensible to a modern audience. So for Oedipus, for instance, I took chunks of Hesiod and buried it in the script to explain the contract with the gods, to explain it to an audience that didn't know, but the Greeks would take it for granted that they would understand it. Modern audiences don't get it, so you have to explain why it is that the gods would be angry with you, the whole city, if one person sinned. So you take the relevant chunks of Hesiod and you bury it in the script. With Agamemnon, there are various references to Iphigenia and what happened to her, but they don't tell the whole story. Certainly they don't tell the whole story of like the Estes, etc. So I put that in the play. So, and somebody actually came up to me afterwards and said, I've seen this play a couple of times. This is the first time I've understood it. So I did something right.
Well, it's very Cassandra, really. If you don't understand it, then you've got her right, really. I wonder if we should actually have the other team now and then come back and bring some friends together. Are you guys ready to go?
So,
I have no idea what you're about to do, so I'm just...
Well, I'm not sure we are either. Really, we're probably going to have what you might call a curated conversation about what By Jove do. My name is Christine, for a start. Some of you probably know me already. Besides being a PhD student at UCL at the moment, not doing anything at all to do with classical drama or reception. I work on Athenian law and rhetoric, so that aside, I am the research and education coordinator for By Jove Theatre. By Jove is David Bullen's baby, really. I met David at RHUL when he was a master's student and I was an undergraduate, and we worked together on the Classical Society's annual classical play. We put on a version of the Orestes myth, which we called Electra Orestes, because we used portions of the Electra plays, portions of Orestes, well, just different portions of different plays, really culminating in a lot of the Eumenides, really. Because we wanted to show a kind of coherent narrative of everything from the death of everyone, really, from the death of Agamemnon through to what you might call the end of that story, if you can say the story has an end. I guess part of what we were trying to do with that play was to explore how the female characters were affected, to explore particularly how Clytemnestra and Electra are affected by that story. The ways in which they are overlooked, cast aside, left without any kind of resolution. Our ending was very much to do with how Orestes gets to kill Clytemnestra, be tried for it, be acquitted, and kind of happily ever after, in a way. And Electra kind of peters off and doesn't really go anywhere, and doesn't get the same kind of closure to her story of her parents' death that her brother does. And also Clytemnestra's rage was a very important part of our production, which we faced some challenges in staging, but we can talk about that later. That was where By Jove was kind of formed, pre-formed, I guess, and since then David has led the company, but the company is very much a collaboration. The writing is done collaboratively by Wendy and others. Wendy's going to talk a little bit about the writing process after I've finished rambling. A lot of the writing is kind of in dialogue with the actors as well, so it's very much we're a company who intend to work collaboratively in creating the plays that we create. The main ethos of the company is to take works from the canon. Primarily for us so far that has meant classical drama, Shakespeare and Jane Austen. So I guess you could broadly say the classics in the non-classic sense. And reinterpret them, rework them, and present them to a modern audience in a way which makes their relevance clear, makes their current relevance clear, and also it's a feminist ethos company, so that's obviously the angle that we tend to bring to things. We are kind of currently / always working on a version of the Buckeye, because David's thesis is a feminist reception history of the Buckeye in Royal Holloway Drama Department. So a lot of his research is carried out through the company. But besides that, we've worked on several other projects which kind of embody those aspects of what we intend to do. The non-classical ones, most recently being Othello, where we cast a woman as Othello to add the dynamic of a lesbian relationship as well as the dynamic of an interracial relationship, in order to just give more layers to the story of their love being outcast, or different kinds of things like that. I won't talk too much about that because obviously this is classics and contemporary drama. And our current upcoming revival of last year's pantomime, which is Pride and Prejudice, which we've tried to very much view from the perspective of it being a story about women, which is interesting for a novel that is such a classic. We've made Mrs. Bennet the pantomime dame, which just, I mean, now that it's done, seems so obvious.
So at the Cockpit Theatre, by the way, 8th till 20th of December.
Yeah.
Sorry that.
I have flyers. No, I don't have flyers. I might have flyers. I'm sure David will have flyers. Anyway, that aside, so the company's first production was Electra Orestes, which then took a couple of other forms, and since then we've been working kind of all the time on this version of the Backline, which is at the moment called Before They Told You What You Are. I say at the moment it's gone through several iterations under several different titles.
Yeah.
I'll leave Wendy to talk in more detail about that,
Yeah.
particularly because you wrote it
Yeah.
in part. For now, I guess I'll talk a little bit about what we've found some of the benefits and some of the problems of using classical drama as a source have been. I think I'll start with the problems because they're the things that stick in my mind the most. It's difficult, drawing on what Phyllis said, I think, it's often difficult to present classical myth, which was intended for an audience who were already familiar with those stories, to a modern audience, because you lose certain aspects of what was originally intended. You lose the fact that a lot of the Greek tragedians were doing innovative things with the stories. They weren't necessarily presenting the myth as it was well known to their audience. They were doing something new with it in a lot of cases. We can suggest, I should say, but I'm not going to go into that too much. You lose things like the continuity of the myth, as Phyllis was saying. You lose the part of the story that they would already know up to this point.
There's so many underlying assumptions that they had that we don't have.
Exactly. I mean, yeah, you watch Oedipus Rex, that's part of a story of Thebes and of Oedipus's life, and then of his children's life, and of a whole different kind of set of things. Similarly with the Oresteia, you have the House of Atreus, you have a whole kind of backstory of myth, which would have been well known to the original audience, which gets lost if, as we are trying to, you present the play to an audience of what I tend to call real people instead of classicists, lay people, people who don't have a classical background. Moreover, we're dealing with plays which often don't know what to do with women. It's debatable whether women were present in the theatre, and it's a debate I don't want to have right now, but we can if you want to, because it's one with a lot of depth to it. But we don't know whether women were present in the theatre, and it's possible they were, and it's possible they weren't. But they were probably not the people that the theatre was aimed at, I think it's safe to say. It was aimed at Athenian citizens who were men, over the age of 18, probably some foreigners as well, but generally at a male audience. It's all male actors, all the female characters are played by men in mask. That complicates the portrayal of female characters immensely. Particularly in the case of things, you've only got 3 actors, you've got more than 3 characters, you have the same actors playing the different characters throughout the course of the play. And that complicates a lot of things to do with the bodies of women and men as characters in these plays, which when David is here in about 15 minutes, he will be willing to elaborate on, because that's a large portion of his research. In a lot of cases, the female characters we're presented with are either morally impeccable in a lot of ways, characters like, I'm thinking characters like Iphigenia, who are kind of sacrificial virgins, whose main purpose in a story is to die. That's their narrative function. Or women who are abhorrent in some way. Clytemnestra, Medea, Agave to some extent, although we can discuss that in more detail. We've got few of what you might call well-rounded female characters, strong female characters, to use that popular phrase. That's not to say we necessarily have those in male characters, but we certainly have an abundance of male characters who are flawed yet heroic. Characters like Hercules, characters who are deeply embedded in a mythological canon, and who have purpose and who have narrative, and who the female characters don't necessarily always have that. So it's difficult to work with those characters in a way which intends to focus on those characters, because often there's very little to focus on. But there are benefits to, obviously, to using these texts, in that they are so rich and they have such a long history, not just in their historical context, but in a reception context. They have been read for thousands of years, and each rereading of them can offer something new. And in a lot of ways, that distance in history allows us a little more flexibility in the way that we treat these texts. Or certainly, we take the license of having more flexibility with them as reception studies kind of people. The space of history can make those stories kind of flexible, and can allow us to transport those characters into new settings or put new words in their mouth without that being particularly troubling. I mean, if Euripides could do it, could put new words in there, could give his characters new stories, why can't we? That's what myth is. Myth is malleable in a lot of ways. It's not necessarily set. You can have myths which contradict each other. And I think a lot of if you can call what we do creating myths, which I think you probably can, they do contradict the ancient myths, but we don't see that as a problem. Those characters, in a way, those two-dimensional female characters, are more interesting to deal with, because you're dealing not only with the characters but with the social perceptions of those characters. You're dealing with the historical moment which has created those characters as they are. Why is Iphigenia so pure and virginal and the subject of sacrifice? There's so much that can be done with that. Similarly, there's so much that can be done with Clytemnestra, who certain of the ancient Greeks would shun. Her name is thrown out as a curse. I'm thinking particularly in a law court speech against a stepmother for poisoning you, Clytemnestra, how dare you, as a curse almost. But she's a spurned woman. Her husband has come home from war with a new wife. Okay, she's taken a lover in that time as well, but it's not as simple as she's evil and she killed her husband and she has to pay. I think the way that those characters exist in history and the way they exist in reception is what makes them so interesting to deal with. I might pass over to you to talk a little bit about your side of this, because I think I've been vague enough.
That's fine. I'm going to talk mainly about the production of Buckeyes, because that was the one I wrote, so it's the only one I can talk about, really. So, yes, By Jove does deal a lot with myth and reworking classical texts. But we also have a very specific part of our manifesto which says we always have to engage with new writing. So when we do work with these classical texts, we never do, to be honest, what I would call a loyal adaptation, or what some would refer to as a loyal adaptation. Because the point is we want to politicise them for a modern feminist audience, and certainly if you're too loyal with that, then that's never going to happen. So myself as a writer, I did not do classics at Royal Holloway, I did drama. So I joined By Jove in 2012 by meeting people, but I hadn't really engaged with classical texts before. And so when I decided to be the sort of main writer for Buckeyes as a project, I decided to use my own ignorance as an advantage, if that makes sense, because there is the way that I like to approach adaptation is very, very loosely. What I did literally was find, again, what you would call a loyal translation of Buckeyes. I read it once, and then I put it down and I didn't look at it ever again. I still haven't at this point now, several months later. 24 hours later, I wrote down everything that I could remember from the story, from the plot, from the characters. The idea being that the things that stick in your mind from that one and only reading are the things that are important to you, and the things that you recognise that stood out. And it came out with, several general plot points, and that was what I worked from. Now, as a feminist writer, engaging with a text like Buckeyes, certainly the company's research into Buckeyes as a play, in brief, sort of adaptations and productions of Buckeyes in the late 20th century, all focused on Dionysus. He is the symbol of that play. He is Buckeyes. He's considered the main character, the most important thing in it. And we can still see that now. If you went to the Almeida a few months ago, all you see is Ben Whishal's face everywhere, and it's a lovely face, but the point is it's Dionysus everywhere. And so when I looked at this play, and when pretty much everyone in By Jove looks at this play, what we see is a play about women. We think it is a play about women, not about Dionysus. It's a play about gender and the performance of gender. Not just because Dionysus is often portrayed as a sort of cross-gendered or effeminate male figure, but because when you actually interrogate the narrative of what's going on in that play, really the people with the real narrative arc, in my opinion, are the women. So I know Dionysus has this big plot about daddy issues, finding his mother, Semele, figuring out whether he's the son of Zeus. People don't believe him. He goes to her grave, and then he finds Pentheus, denying that he is the son of Zeus, and he decides to punish him. But actually, the whole experience for Dionysus isn't that emotional. He's just very proud, and he wants to play with some people. At least that was my interpretation of him as a character. Whereas the women, they have a serious, serious problem in this play, which is that they are oppressed women in Thebes. And Agave, in particular, is mother of Pentheus, is suppressed by him, makes the decision to leave the city, to go into the mountains, then ends up ripping her son's head off, coming back to the city, having killed her own son, supposedly under the thrall of Dionysus. I guess you all know this plot, of course, but my point is I think there is far more of a story in there for the female characters, which has been ignored most deliberately. So that was what caught my attention when I decided to do this adaptation and when I read it through just once. So I guess with political theatre, when we're thinking about politicising this old text. When you think about political theatre, it has a lot of very ugly stereotypes associated with it, to do with, soapboxes and, waving things in people's faces and shouting a message. But the way we prefer to look at political theatre is that actually it comes through character, it comes through narrative. It is not something which you achieve by sacrificing good storytelling. It comes from within good storytelling, if that makes sense. So the way I went about trying to politicise Buckeye was obviously by finding experiences within it that I could identify with as a 21st century woman. And to be honest, identifying with an oppressed woman is quite easy if you've experienced cultural oppression at all, which probably every woman in this room has in some way or another. The question of, she had said this at the beginning really, but why we would even want to engage with these classical texts in the first place as modern women who are trying to create feminist theatre. The canon, I think, poses a real problem. Obviously, the canon culturally is the selection of texts from yesteryear, which have been somehow collectively decided as good, and that we keep coming back to again and again and again, because that's what we like to do. A big part of that is Shakespeare. And of course, that canon and our obsession with it is a huge part of what takes away opportunities for women directors, women actors, women writers in the theatre industry. So that's a bit awkward. But in order to deal with that problem, the only thing we can do is engage with this canon, which is why I like the idea of Jove engaging with these canonical texts and deliberately turning them around, because they're not going to go away. We can't make them go away, so we're going to have to just disrupt them. So the interesting thing about Greek classical texts in particular, I think, is the violence, more specifically the female violence, because God, there's so much of it compared to Shakespearean texts, for example, where women don't really do much at all. I did a bit of research for my master's degree into sort of late 20th century British theatre and the portrayal of violent women. And what I found in brief is that in portrayals of women who commit violence in contemporary British theatre, it's about the way that we justify their actions, which I think reveals a lot about how we feel about women who commit violence and about men who are victims of violence. Because in the narratives of these women who are committing violence, it's usually either because they have been victimised themselves already, which makes a lot of sense. That's a good way to create a story, someone taking revenge for something that's happened to them. Or it's because they are insane, or it's because they are monstrous. These are all the stereotypes that we throw at women who commit violence. Well, they've got to be crazy, or we dehumanise them, because a sane human woman cannot possibly make the decision to commit violence, unless they are taking revenge against someone who has harmed them. We're very uncomfortable with the idea of women having agency in violence, I think. And this ties into what happens with Agave and her son, Pentheus. I think the assumption is that when Agave rips her own son's head off, it's because she's under the thrall of Dionysus, and he almost makes her do it. It's not something that she does of her own will. So I decided for this adaptation that I would like to blur the line with that, and play with the idea that no, actually, she did decide to do this herself. She may have been, off in the mountains having some crazy fun times for a few weeks, but actually, she had plenty of reasons to consider killing him, if that makes sense. Because of the rather sort of patronising tyranny which he puts forward onto the women of Thebes, at least in the story that I was making, that was what he was doing. An almost sort of Richard Dawkins type figure of, I know what's best for you women, And her response to that is, no, you don't.
I can sympathise with that. I spent most of my life living that kind of patronage from gentlemen.
Indeed, and there we go. That is the feeling which modern women who are alive today can still relate to.
I'm talking about people of not your generation, but a couple of generations back. But
Yeah.
I mean, I once, when I was in my 20s, wanted to borrow some money. I got a hi-fi system for my 21st birthday, but I couldn't. My father couldn't afford the CD player that went with it, so I went and bought one myself. And I said, "Can I give you 3 checks? No, 3 postage." "Yeah, no problem." I said, "Where do I sign?" I said, "Oh, you don't sign. The man financially responsible for you signs. We can't lend you money."
Yeah.
This was in 1968. You know, it wasn't in the dark ages.
And those exact kind of stories you will hear from tons of different women in this country and in other countries as well. So, with Agave, me and Chrissy had a great conversation about women in theatre and the difference between actually seeing them on stage when they're enacting their stories, both seeing and hearing. And the interesting thing about Agave is that she's very often played by the same actor who plays Pentheus. She's weirdly kind of mentioned in the first half of Buckeyes, but she isn't actually supposed to appear until the very end when she's got, Pentheus's head. And then even then, she's often just played by a man. So right from the off, we knew we didn't want to do this, and I knew that I wanted her to be not the main character, because that's a horrible word, but a presence, a visible presence from the very beginning, because I was telling her story, not Dionysus's story.
And I think, if I can leap in on this issue, embodying women on stage is important and interesting and fun in a lot of ways. I think, hear more and more and now about the importance of representation for marginalised people. And representing a woman cannot be a man dressed as a woman. If it wants to be representation of, if we want to represent a woman's rage or a woman's violence, to me it has to be a woman committing that rage or committing that violence. And anecdotally, I still don't think that certainly what we might call mainstream theatre audiences are comfortable with it. Because when I saw Electra, the one that was on at the young Liverpool, the one with Kristen Scott Thomas, when she was raging, hysterical, screaming, laughing, crying, the audience laughed. They were not comfortable with her rage and her anguish on stage. They could not accept it as rage and anguish, they could only accept it as a hysterical woman. How embarrassing that a woman would lose decorum in that way. They laughed. My friend was there with me. It's a true story. Which is why we have to keep putting them on stage.
But would they have laughed if it was, or found it cringy, if a man had done that? I mean, sort of, I watched Doctor Who and Matt Smith at Stonehenge, and, sort of, who's going to be first? I actually cringe. I don't like that scene. I find it very embarrassing. That someone should, sort of, because I can see the hubris there, and I know you're going to fall.
Yeah. But I think in general, those kinds of popular theatre audiences, when confronted with a man's rage, it's much more, oh, how awful, not, oh, how awful.
Cringe making.
Yeah. There's a more of a sense, the shock is there, but it's the shock at him being so angry, at whatever has made him angry, rather than at the fact that he would dare to react in such an obvious way, I suppose.
No, I actually really don't like him reacting in that obvious way. I think, if it works for me, looking at a male doing that, the same as women who have been laughed at.
Yeah. But I guess that was my experience of it in that theatre, which was very, and was also a very, what I would call a traditional version of that play.
You say you like, sorry, am I interrupting?
No, I feel like we're kind of drifting off into discussion waters if we...
You say you deal with the canon, Well, one of my pet hates in the canon is the Victorian novel, because every woman who transgresses has to die.
Yes. It's funny you should say that, because in the pantomime Pride and Prejudice that we were doing, obviously there are feminist issues with panto which we talk about for ages. We did a collection of essays on it, haven't we?
Yes, there will be at our pantomime a little booklet of some thoughts from various people which will be available.
We still, in order to subvert it, we obviously kept a lot of the traditional panto aspects. So the good fairy is Jane Austen and the evil villain is Charles Dickens. The point being, not necessarily, because he's a very, very talented writer, etc., etc. But he does have a habit of clubbing his women to death, and it's really irritating. So the point is that the whole thing plays out as Jane Austen trying to, get her story going and have a happy ending for her women. And Charles Dickens trying to ruin everything because he's a big fat meanie.
Not a very nice husband.
No, not a very nice husband, etc., etc. So yeah, when we talk about it, yeah, I agree. I also hate using words like the canon and myth because they are so incredibly vague. But we look at myth in a very broad sense. So it isn't just classical Greek myth, or well, we never deal with the Romans because they're boring. But
but it's not just what you would think of as myths or mythology. It is very much a sense of stories which are told again and again in modern culture and in early modern culture and in ancient culture throughout saying throughout human history is so broad. But you know what I hope you know what I mean. We interpret Pride and Prejudice as a myth because of the way it has been retold in film and in television and has kind of captured popular imagination in a certain way, and people can tell you broadly what the story of Pride and Prejudice is without having read Pride and Prejudice.
Does it actually place itself as a myth by starting off, it's the Truth University of College? That's a myth, right?
Yeah, it has to be, I think. Yeah, it situates itself in a kind of universal space throughout time and history and place.
Knows this.
Yeah, this is how it is, and now we'll see this play out in one particular aspect, which is, often how Greek tragedy works. Here is a truth about the world. The gods are inscrutable. Let's see how that works for Hippolytus.
yeah.
So can I ask a question from the chair, which I think you've kind of circled around this topic in very interesting ways. It just happens that not only are you women practitioners, but you're also women scholars, and you're all at a similar kind of point of your career. You're in the middle of, or about to embark on a doctoral program. You're early career scholars, as it were. You're working at the cutting edge. You've got this academic day job, but you're also studying this material in a completely different way by night, as it were. And I was wondering, you've probably all got different answers to this question, but I was wondering how those two ways of recuperating the classics, if you feel there's any kind of feminist agenda to your scholarship. I don't know if you mentioned antiphon on Clytemnestra as though this is actually something that is speaking to you out of your day job life, but you're not allowed to politicise it in your day job. You have to return to Clytemnestra as a dramatist. Maybe it would be worth starting with Phyllis on this, because I don't know. I know I have least sense of the answer to this question from what you've already said.
So you're wondering about the feminism about. Well, I think the important thing about Sandy in this particular play is that she had the courage of her convictions. She was also working in a field in America she would probably not have had in England. A secretary in England was still very much a man's job. You were the typist, etc. But she had an awful lot of autonomy in this play, and she had been trusted within the bounds of legality and what the broker let her do, and the bank supervising her. But she could go to the bank and go to the broker and sell shares and put the money in the bank. And everyone, sort of within the parameters of that, she was able to do what was traditionally in England a man's role.
But as a classical scholar, is she answering questions that you as a student, as a scholar specifically in classical reception, are finding arise in different ways in your research, but are hard to, as it were, to formulate professional answers to? Is that one of the places she's coming from?
With Cassandra, just generally as opposed to outside this play, one of the things I found in my research is that Lindsay, I was looking at 3 narrative lines and the unheeded voice, and the most popular was Lindsay Clark. I keep saying Lindsay David. Lindsay Clark's 2 Homer books, the Voyage to Troy and Return from Troy, and he gave Cassandra's voice to Odysseus and left her as just sort of I'm going to die and I've got to sort of, and I know what's going to happen and everything, but her warnings and everything about that side of her, he gave to Odysseus. And she had nothing to do with that at all.
Well, she has nothing to do with Homer either. It's Aeschylus who It's Aeschylus who propheticises her. She's not actually a prophetic figure in Homer yet. Can I sort of ask the same sort of question of the two of you? I mean, particularly as people sort of, as it were, still trying to establish a kind of academic identity for yourselves. How do you see these lives as playing off one another? I mean, it's easy to talk for the classicist to answer. It's harder for the drama.
I mean, I generally find that feminist theory is very much my other research interests include, because there is very little, so far I have found very little room for it in my thesis research. Though I don't necessarily think that the space isn't there. A lot of the work has already been done, and a lot of the work has focused on Neaira. Demosthenes 59, I guess some people might be aware of it, if not, it's a case involving the trying of a prostitute, a Corinthian prostitute, alleged Corinthian prostitute, well, alleged prostitute, she probably is Corinthian, who allegedly has married an Athenian and passed off her daughter from her alleged activities as a prostitute, perhaps, or some previous relationship, as his Athenian daughter, and then carried on and done a whole load of other awful things which you mustn't do if you're not an Athenian citizen, essentially. And her presence in the courtroom has been talked about a lot by a lot of different people, including me in my undergraduate thesis. But apart from that, in the research I'm doing right now, there is very little space for it apart from in Antiphon 1, which is one of my favourite speeches. It's the stuff that this is kind of, I think what you're getting at is this is the outlet for those interests. And I've talked many times to David about writing something based on something like Antiphon 1, or on women in the courts, some kind of play or piece to be acted. I'm not a creative writer, so it would be a case of getting you on side. But yeah, they aren't necessarily compatible for me at the moment. And I feel like as well, I don't know if this is, well, I'm going to say it anyway, my field is very male, old, white, dominated. It's an old-fashioned subject, and therefore a lot of the people working in it are older academics. They aren't by any means all, and I know several, Adrian Lammy and Victoria Wall spring to mind, and also Lena, who are incredible, some of my academic idols, I suppose. But every conference I go to, there's me and 5 other women and 40 men, which is kind of strange. And I'm getting to grips with it, I suppose, and I don't really have an answer to that if it's a question. but it's more an experience than a question, I suppose.
Well, you were asking what modern writings could do. The best reception for, say, Cassandra is Crystal Wolfe's Cassandra, which is the stream of consciousness novel, which takes place within 1 minute while she's waiting to go in through the gate to Agamemnon's palace, and she knows perfectly well what will happen when she gets there. And Crystal Wolfe is a communist, and it's very much an anti-fascist diatribe. And she sets the whole situation up where the oppression of women becomes the oppression of whole cultures and voices, and it uses Cassandra to look at oppression generally, but a specific oppression at a specific time as well.
I'm not going to let Wendy off the hook here. Actually. You're the non-classicist, and you actually, I mean, your research area is actually in a completely different sort of direction in time, really, almost.
Yeah. Well, I say I'm in very, very green with my academia. I'm still just applying to do a PhD, but what I'm looking at is utopian feminist science fiction, but for theatre. Lots and lots of words in there. I'm somehow going to knit all of those things together and hopefully it'll make something wonderful. But I mean, the thing about feminist theory is that I'm completely obsessed with it, so it worms its way into everything that I do, whether I like it or not, because it's just nested in the back of my brain and it just goes all the time. I don't know how else to describe it in a nice way. But when it comes to that and the creative writing side, when I try and do creative writing as an academic project, I've found, unfortunately, that they don't always help each other, because if you have an academic agenda when you're writing a play, at least when I do that, I find that my characters just become these soulless vessels for my own opinions, which nobody's interested. Nobody wants to go and see a play where an actor stands on stage and just blurts out the writer's opinions for half an hour and doesn't have their own voice. I find I create much better work when I try and allow the characters to develop themselves.
Yeah.
So just in the last year and a half, I've deliberately separated those bits of my life. And everything I did with Buckeyes, although I can talk a lot about the feminist theory from it, when I was actually working on it, I wasn't thinking about that too much. I was thinking about Agave, who is she, what is her story, how is she a person, and then it all kind of comes naturally afterwards. I forgot to mention actually, we were supposed to have my wonderfully talented friend S.J. Brady performing a bit of the show, but she couldn't make it, so I printed it in the handout instead. Which you can get, it's just a monologue which shows a bit of how I tried to make it about her, if that makes sense, which you can look at if you want to.
Before we open, I just want to follow on one thing on that. Are you interested in the experience of the chorus? Because I mean, the title of the play is actually a bunch of women.
Yeah. So the thing about the chorus, when we decided we wanted to do an adaptation of Buckeyes, we said we really want to make it about the women. But then we only had 3 actors, and suddenly things became a lot more complicated. And it was also complicated by the fact that I'm really bad at writing verse. I really can't do it. So I didn't, exactly, so I was like, I'm not going to do it. My friend Alexander Woodward, who some classicists may know, he was another writer involved with the show. Yes, I should say very much. I wrote 70% of it, the rest was Alexander Woodward, and then I put it all together, because he is a poet, and he's excellent at writing verse. So there were some choral sections in there. Do you know, it was partly a practical thing, partly just me not being that interested in verse writing. So, but I think part of approaching it as a feminist writer is not confusing loyalty to the Greeks with respect for their plays. I was just like, do you know what, if I'm not interested in the chorus, there's nothing wrong with that. Some people may disagree with that completely, But it was about creating the piece that we wanted, and it was a shame, but we really struggled to fit them in, if that makes sense. But we adjusted by we had 4 actors in the end. They didn't just play one part, it was all multi-rolled. There was one woman who kind of did all the important agave bits, so there was a bit of consistency. But other than that, that was how we worked in a choral element, by kind of switching the bodies around, if that makes sense.
And they did work in chorus at
Yeah.
times. So I think there was also a logistical issue of we are still quite a small company.
Yeah.
And we do not have a huge company of actors to be a chorus, to be called on to sing and dance. And whether we would make them sing and dance is a whole different question.
Of course, yeah.
I know that one.
Mm-hmm.
Just trying to get anyone at all is tough, isn't it?
Yeah.
But I mean, what we did when we did Talk to Me is that I put it into the Liverpool Drama Festival, where it won the prize for the best new drama. And to fund it, because it's £60 entry fee, and then you have to pay for the critique as well, and then there's all the expenses involved. It runs to about £100. We put it on as dinner theatre. And the trick with that is to make sure that the caterer gets as much as you do, because otherwise the audience doesn't come back.
Yeah.
And we did it as three courses. They came in and they got their drinks and settled themselves down, and then we started. We'd have a lucky ticket number, so there was every time we stopped, we had a reason to stop, and we'd say, "Right, go up and get your starters, and then after that we will have the draw for the lucky number, and then you go up and you get your meal, and then we close the bar, and then they watch the play after they have had their meal while they're finishing off their wine, so that they watch the play at a nice, comfortable dinner table, and we set it up. I've got tablecloths and table setters and everything. And they watch the play sitting at a nice, comfortable table on comfortable chairs with a bottle of wine.
Yeah.
And then they go up and they have their sweet and
Yeah.